Hi, it's Taylor T. Carlson, and I'm back with another game review for you. Going back to the old vault of Nintendo classics, today I thought I would take a look at The Legend of Zelda from 1986. This, of course, being the first game in what would become one of Nintendo's most iconic game franchises. Released in Japan for the Famicom in 1986, it got an American release the following year. It was one of the first video games, if not the first video game, to have battery backup to save. There had been some other games around this time that saved progress with passwords, but this is the game that really brought the whole battery-saving thing to the masses. Even if you've never played the original, you probably have a pretty good idea of what the plot is here based on what goes on in some of the later, better-received installments. You play as Link, who is a young swordsman who is out to rescue Princess Zelda from the evil wizard Ganon. Ganon has the Triforce of Power, which is a relic that gives him immense power. Princess Zelda had possession of the Triforce of Wisdom, but before she was captured by Ganon, she split it into 8 pieces so that Ganon couldn't get his hands on it. Those 8 pieces went to 8 dungeons, and Link has to go about getting better equipment, fighting, moving around the open world in order to get the equipment he needs to defeat the bosses in these dungeons, and of course, eventually go save Princess Zelda from Ganon after he's gotten all 8 pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom back. The game is divided into overworld and underworld sections. The overworld, of course, being the big, sprawling, open-air map where the majority of the game will take place. The underworld is where you'll find the 9 dungeons, and those are scattered all around with their entrances in the overworld, and the entrances are not always easy to find, so you definitely have to look everywhere. There's also many hidden secrets and items throughout the game, and as you progress and you defeat enemies, you're going to get rupees, which are the currency in this world, and you can save up and buy new equipment. You can also purchase keys that you can use to unlock doors in dungeons. Typically, you can find all the keys that you need in a dungeon, but you might want to save up the rupees and buy an extra key if you think that could be an issue later on. The items in the game are plentiful. A lot of these have appeared in later games. You'll see things like boomerang, bow and arrows, rings that can enhance your defensive power, bigger shields, and there's also 3 different swords. You start the game with the most basic wooden sword that you get in a cave from an old man, but as you progress through the game, you can find people who have other swords, and as you grow your life meter, when you reach certain levels and meet certain requirements, you can get those bigger, better swords. Over the years, we've gotten a ton of Zelda games, and this is where it all began. So how does the very first installment in this series measure up? Overall, even 30 plus years on, it does hold up pretty well. The core gameplay and a lot of the elements that would come to define this franchise were intact from the beginning. Obviously, some things had to be a little fine-tuned down the road. This game is honestly a little too open-ended as far as its overworld goes. Even the instruction manual in the original NES release actually had to tell you where the first 2 dungeons were because it's just such a big world, and sometimes those entrances are not in the most obvious of places. That's probably my biggest complaint with this game, is there's some things like that where you literally would have no idea what to do unless you had a player's guide. I do remember when I was a little boy playing through this game, I actually had to call up the counselor's corner at Nintendo Power to get the answer to find how to enter one of the dungeons. I mean, if you have to do that, then it's probably a sign that the programmers may have expected a little too much out of the players the first time around. Now, throughout the overworld, there are hidden areas that you have to do things like bombing the walls or burning down bushes in order to find, and sometimes this is actually how you find the entrances to the underworld dungeons, but with so many bushes and so many rock walls, knowing exactly where you can do that with no pre-assigned signs of any kind can be kind of a pain and can result in hours of trial and error. Likewise, there are spots in the dungeons where you can drop a bomb to open a new path by destroying a wall, but once again, you don't really have any way of being able to tell this without laying down a bomb. Later games would add in like cracks to walls or little hints, and you could ding your sword against the wall to hear a chime, And if that sound was different, it was a pretty good sign that you could potentially bomb the wall. Sadly, the original Legend of Zelda has nothing like this, and it can result in you wasting a lot of bombs throughout the game. That's another one of my biggest complaints, is that items that run on an inventory, like bombs, I find myself getting low on them very often. And considering there is one boss enemy that appears as a mini-boss split into 3 in later dungeons, and they're only weak against bombs, this definitely became a problem for me a lot of the time. And it seems like the enemies don't seem to drop the bombs unless you really don't happen to need them at the time, which can be kind of a pain. You really don't get a lot of help in the game just because there's not really a whole lot of NPCs that you can get help from. There are some that live in caves throughout the world. Sometimes they'll give you advice, sometimes they'll offer you potential items or weapons, sometimes you'll find merchants who sell goods, but there aren't a whole lot of in-game hints, and this goes back to what I said earlier. It's like, it's almost impossible to beat this game without using a player's guide or memorizing where almost everything is, which I've kind of done over the years just because I've literally been playing this game since I was a little boy. It's been reissued by Nintendo on countless systems and compilations over the years. The footage that I'm using in this review is actually sourced from the NES Classic Edition version, which I believe makes a few minor revisions to the NES game, mainly clearing up some of the English text that was in the opening crawl text of story that was in the initial NES release. The poor translation in some places and the lack of proper English adaptation results in one major issue where you're told that an enemy dislikes sound, yet using the whistle item in the game does not destroy that enemy, and that's because the original Japanese Famicom controller had a microphone that you would make noise into to destroy that enemy, and they didn't bother changing the hint for American audiences because obviously there was no microphone in the NES controller, and it's something kind of confusing that really probably should have been fixed before the game was initially released in America. Overall, I would say that the initial Legend of Zelda was a very good game. Maybe not quite a masterpiece, but that's only because a lot of these elements would be perfected in later installments. It's still a personal favorite of mine despite its flaws. What do you think of the original Legend of Zelda? How well has it aged? Is this one of your favorite games in the series? Is it not one that you're a huge fan of? Go ahead and comment down below and let me know what you think, because I'd love to hear what you think about this game. Also, subscribe to my channel and be sure to like this video. I'm Taylor T. Carlson, and I will see you for my next video game review.